What's up, Nestors? It's the Russian dude. Florida Panthers is in the Eastern Conference Finals, so they're playing today. Well, by the time this video goes live, the result will be already over, so yeah, let's go Panthers. But back to the video. Here we go again. In the late spring of 2025, staring down a barrel of another broken promise. The world begged for peace in Ukraine, and Moscow's elusive representatives responded with laughter. For example, Sergei Lavrov's declaration on May 21st, he basically said, "We don't want this anymore." Was not just a policy statement. It was more like a direct hit at the very idea of a ceasefire. Meanwhile, the most unlikely peacemaker, Donald Trump, has been both championing and sabotaging a full 30-day truce, depending on who he is talking to. And if you thought the insanity stopped at Ukraine's front lines, well, guys, think again. Russia is quietly transforming its Arctic borders into a staging ground for the next potential confrontation, funneling troops and hardware towards Finland, like kids, hoarding candy before Halloween. In this twisted militaristic carnival, the Kremlin's unwillingness to compromise, Trump's mixed signals, and Europe's weary foot dragging paint a portrait of a world addicted to a conflict. Everyone seems to want peace, but no one is willing to compromise and do the actual, meaningful first step towards it. One side is within its rights to do so. Under no circumstances Ukraine should ever give up its land to the aggressor, encouraging similar behavior in the future. And not just for Putin, but for other war-hungry dictators around the world as well. Another side, Russia, is simply non-cooperative. There's nothing else to say about it. Not much will be achieved through peaceful talks for as long as Putin is in power. But what is really at play? Why does Putin's regime equate peace with defeat? How did Trump, the man who once belittled alliances, ended up wobbling between peace talks and approval of war? And can a continent plagued by economic pain muster the resolve to stand with Ukraine? Or will it fold under Putin's pressure? Let's try to answer those questions in today's video. Let's dive headfirst into the diplomatic deep end, where Sergei Lavrov reigns like a sidekick warlord in a villain tuxedo. On that fateful May 21st press conference, the seasoned ambassador dismissed the US-led push for a 30-day ceasefire with a disdain of someone swatting away an annoying mosquito. He basically said, "We have already heard these stories, we do not want this anymore." Notice how Lavrov framed the truth not as a lifeline, not as a solution to the common problem, but as a tedious, annoying rerun. The Kremlin's basically version of "we've been there, we've done that, not gonna do it ever again." Lavrov's rejection was not about sending some kind of hidden messages. It was a meticulously choreographed broadcast of Russian strength. By labeling ceasefire talks as naive diversions, the Kremlin sends two clear signals. First, to domestic audiences hungry for an image of an unbreakable might. And second, to the international observers living under the illusion that diplomacy can still change Putin's mind. But here is the dirty little secret. This proclamation is, well, obviously a charade. Behind closed doors, Russia's generals are reeling back from battlefield setbacks. Weapons stockpiles are strained, supply lines are stretched, and public support teeters on the brink of revolt. A formal ceasefire would force Moscow to face and acknowledge mounting casualties, also the murky accounting of its battlefield failures, and then the political liability of dangling empty promises to its people. In other words, a real pause in the war would shine a glaring spotlight on every brutality, every corruption scandal, every missing soldier whose family will not know his fate until mass graves are exhumed. Because, well, it is easy now for Russian politicians to draw people's attention elsewhere when needed. Because once things settle down, this is when people will start asking questions and looking for answers. For this reason, Lavrov's defiance is less about principle and more about damage control. It is Kremlin PR by atrocity. Refuse the ceasefire, insist on grand peace talks where Russia sets the agenda, and then watch as the world tires of waiting on Warsaw and Washington to agree on a statement. It is basically a textbook hostage-taking, with the world as the captive audience. Another big part of an ongoing confusion related to potential peace talks are the actions of Donald Trump. One day he says he wants peace and supports Ukraine, the next day he blames Zelensky for starting the war. Let's talk about Trump's impact and his closed-door meetings right now. Enter Donald Trump, the self-proclaimed problem solver. In March, he threw the diplomatic world a curveball by publicly endorsing a 30-day ceasefire. Ukraine, eager for any lifeline, said yes on spot. Europe cheered. And yet, behind the curtain, Trump was spinning a different narrative in private calls with Macron, Merkel and Ursula von der Leyen. He said to them Putin was convinced he could win, that peace was off the table, and everything that was being discussed were just empty words and promises. This double game left Europe reeling. Imagine clearing your calendar for a peace summit only to have the host whisper that he never actually sent the invitations. On May 19th, Trump's administration was relayed by European diplomats as if it were a sinking ship's mayday. Still, his public stance remained bullish on a truce, proof that in Trump world, policy is decided by the latest poll or a Twitter post, not by the consistent principle. So why the flip-flops? Part of it is just a classic Trump's dealmanship. Keep everyone guessing so you can pounce from a position of authority. But it is also a testament to his enduring instinct to avoid responsibility. When pressed on sanctions, he said, "Guys, this is not my war," as if leadership is a voluntarily high-stakes carnival ride. And when European officials pressed him to tighten the screws on Moscow, he backed off, insisting that the US would only keep sending arms if somebody else pays for them. This schizophrenic performance does more than scramble agendas. It undermines the entire alliance structure. When a so-called leader of the free world works for peace with one hand and then sabotages it with the other, it signals to Putin that the West's unity is a brittle facade, ready to crack under the weight of the next crisis, wherever it may be. And as discussed several times in our previous videos, Putin was very quick to realize this thing about Trump. For many months, Putin is, simply playing with him, playing with his emotions, stroking his ego, and giving him this false hope that eventually, at some point in the future, Trump will be able to tell the whole wide world that Trump and Trump only was able to achieve peace between Russia and Ukraine. Russia, Ukraine, and the US, without a doubt, are the three biggest players in this ongoing conflict, but we obviously cannot forget about Europe. Let's talk about what's going on there and the situation next to Finnish border in our next chapter. Across the Channel and the Alps, Europe's ruling class faces its own crisis of conviction. Sanctions are the continent's primary lever against Moscow's war chest, but each additional round of punitive measures carries a toll. Gas prices spike, supply chains are disrupted, farmers protest, and political winds shift towards parties promising to end the pain, sometimes promising to use some, very questionable ultra-radical methods. Ursula von der Leyen, Emmanuel Macron, Friedrich Merz and Keir Starmer can deliver moving speeches in Brussels, but every call for fresh sanctions bumps against the grumbling in factory towns and gas-deprived apartments. Axios Media reported their shock when Trump privately endorsed Putin's war aims, but the bigger shock is that European leaders continue to be indecisive on economic pressures while Ukrainian cities smolder. Political calculus often trumps, pun intended, moral clarity. Germany, for instance, risks electoral backlash if gas shortages spike this winter. Italy courts right-wing populists straining in the leash, and Europe's own decision-making process resembles a Byzantine chess match. Each member state wielding vetoes like hidden landmines, but what's the result? A muddled, tepid sanctions policy that emboldens the Kremlin to adapt, recalibrate and rearm. It's the classic tragedy of the commons. Everyone benefits from pressuring Russia, but no single leader can bear the full cost alone. And so sanctions fatigue sets in. The longer Ukraine bleeds, the more urgent Europe's domestic politics become. And for Putin, that means a war of attrition in Europe's living rooms as well as on the Ukrainians' battlefields. If you think the war ends at Ukrainian borders, well, it's not exactly that. Sure, I mean, physical confrontation exists only in Ukraine and some parts of Russia, but some pre-war activities have already started spreading beyond these territories. In the Arctic chill beyond the Urals, Russia is pivoting towards its longest NATO frontier, Finland. After Helsinki ditched neutrality and joined NATO in April 2023, the Kremlin's response has been a cold calculation of muscle flexing. Such as, for example, new tent cities near Kamenka to house 2,000 troops, warehouses in Petrozavodsk stocked for armored brigades, and the resurrection of Severomorsk 2 helicopter base for Arctic patrols. Why Finland, some may ask, even though the answer might be pretty obvious. Well, geography. This 1,340-kilometer border slices through boreal forests and rolling tundra straight to St. Petersburg's doorstep. Control here means safeguarding Russia's Baltic flank and the Northern Fleet's lifeline in Murmansk. Moreover, Finnish forces are no slouches. They have hiked defense spending to 3% of their GDP, extending reservist age to 65, and even abandoned the Arwa Treaty on landmines in concern with Poland and Baltic states. Satellite imagery leaks to the Wall Street Journal and New York Times only confirm what Finnish military planners have warned. Russian military is getting closer. They're not just preparing for future war. They are signaling that even after Ukraine falls or hangs in stalemate, they intend to keep Europe on its edge. Finland's response is equally serious. Massive joint exercises with the US troops, self-propelled artillery like K9 Thunders and M270 MLRS lining up on frosted grounds, and the pending arrival of F-35s, the world's most sophisticated combat jets. Helsinki is not building defenses for show. They're constructing a fortress state ready for hybrid threats, cyber incursions, and the specter of Russian push through the Arctic corridor. Analysts at RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, caution that Finland's border could be the next flashpoint if a Baltic conflict erupts. Would Putin gamble on a two-war front? Conventional wisdom says no, but we have already seen Moscow rewrite the rules of conventional warfare in Ukraine. Nobody thought Putin will take Crimea. Nobody thought Putin will invade Ukraine, even as his tanks were already stationed next to country's border. So why would not he do so again if his imperial ambitions demanded it? Not too many people think Putin will invade any other country besides Ukraine, but as history shows, Putin is no ordinary man that practices rational thinking or listens to common sense. It is better to be prepared and not engage in combat activities rather than leave borders wide open and welcome Russian soldiers salivating in temptation. Well, there you have it, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. Let's go Panthers! If you wish to support my work, the links are below. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.